Hello, today is November 4th. I would like to begin my briefing by reminding you that exactly 1 month ago, on October 4th, radical political groups, backed by some representatives from Brussels, stormed the presidential palace. The state narrowly escaped bloodshed and a return to the chaos of the past. It would be good to hear at least today a clear and unambiguous position from Brussels on the radical groups in Georgia that are bent on overthrowing the government and are backed by forces in Brussels. This is an obvious fact, and an illustration of how the European bureaucracy treats Georgia, the Georgian people and their choice. Bureaucracy, which manifested itself in a hidden political agenda, arrogant attitude and disrespect towards all those countries that do not blindly obey, try to make decisions independently and exercise their sovereign rights. A good example of this is today's extended report on Georgia by the European Commission, which seamlessly intertwines faded political accusations, lies, hostile rhetoric, and deliberate sabotage. The Georgia seen from the Brussels office has nothing in common with the real Georgia. It is in this traditional spirit that today's EU report is presented, in which the section on Georgia is stitched together with white thread, and the part of the report that assesses the country's progress based on measurable indicators is written in a very dry and terse manner. The political part of the report is aggressive and unfair. That is why we want to state clearly that the result of such an unfair, biased, undemocratic attitude towards Georgia, aimed at polarizing the country, is the activity of the current ruling institutions of the EU. In the report presented, the EU uses ethnic epithets to accuse Georgia of lying, promoting disinformation, and remaining silent about the truth of Russian ambassadors' interference in parliamentary elections. Today, we are witnessing a regrettable moment in history, when Brussels is clearly distancing itself from Europe and European values. The EU is distancing itself from its promises and foundations in order not to defend the European values for which it was originally created. Instead of a defender of democracy and human rights, we are left with an ideologized bureaucratic machine that seeks to silence critics and eliminate opponents, and considers any means acceptable to achieve this goal. Brussels' regression in terms of values towards Georgia became apparent in the summer of 2022, when Georgia was denied EU candidate status, despite the fact that Georgia was and is clearly ahead of Moldova and Ukraine in all key indicators of EU integration. It is obvious that the purpose of this injustice was to cause unrest in Georgia. Moreover, some post-Soviet Euro politicians are peddling their narrow geopolitical narratives and interests in order to force Georgia into a deeper conflict with Russia at the expense of its own territorial integrity and security. All this is being done despite the fact that the most cherished European ideal should be peace and conflict resolution, not the incitement and sowing of conflict and war. The regression in values is evident in what Brussels is doing in Georgia when it supports groups that promote hate speech instead of reconciliation or consensus, violence instead of dialogue. It is becoming increasingly clear that the aim of Brussels' approach is to discourage people from integrating into the European Union, so as not to accept another country that does not blindly obey orders and instructions, like Hungary, Slovakia, and now the Czech Republic. The choice between unfair treatment, confrontation, and giving up in the face of obstacles has been with us not only today, but throughout our history. Blackmail and pressure on Georgia are not working now. We are not going to give up. Georgia will continue to prepare for EU membership, not in the European Union that is today's Brussels bureaucracy, devoid of European content, consisting only of the name Union, but in one where the goal is to restore European values. We are witnessing a real awakening in Europe, with countries one after another choosing governments and strategies that return the EU to a system of true values, rejecting Brussels' unjust and inappropriate interference in internal affairs. National values, the will of the people, true democracy, and the rule of law. We can clearly see how Georgia's future trajectory is intertwined with the path of development based on the above-mentioned relevant values of the European Union.